joining. So this is the third session of Northern Powergrid in Conversation series. Northern Powergrid has been developing some really exciting, innovative projects, and they wanted to share them with you so that you can learn a bit more about what Northern Powergrid does, gain some insights, and ask questions about how Northern Powergrid operates. So on the call today from Northern Powergrid, we have Ross and Victoria. I'm Alexa, and I'm from Traverse, and I've been doing some help with Northern Powergrid's engagement over the course of the last 5 months. And my colleague Patrick is on the call today as well. Patrick is helping out with tech supports and difficulties. So if you experience any technical difficulties, please feel free to message Patrick in the chat and he can get things sorted out for you. And then there's you, Northern Powergrid stakeholders who are interested in its innovative projects. I won't spend much longer on this intro and welcoming because we have a lot of conversation to get to with Ross. Our conversation, Ross and my conversation, will last about 30 minutes, at which point we're going to move to an audience Q&A. So you'll be able to ask questions. And then we'll close the session 10:25, make sure you're out of here by 10:30 so that you can get on with your work day or Friday, maybe you're taking a holiday. Most of you are probably quite familiar with Zoom right now, but for those of you who don't know, there's some important features. The first one being at the bottom corner is the mute button. We are recording these sessions today and we would really like to minimize background noise. So if you can stay on mute while you're not talking, that would be great. In addition, if you don't want to be part of the recording, you can turn off your video and that's fine. We also, it's an informal conversation today. If you do have your video on, don't worry if children or pets are popping up in the background. I would also really love for you to utilize the chat function. I see it's already being used, but practice, introduce yourself in there. And as Ross and I are talking, if questions come to mind, pop them into the chat right then and there, because we don't want you forgetting them by the time the Q&A rolls around, and I'll work through the chat questions when we get to that time. Please do that. If for whatever reason you don't want to type your chat, I'll give you an opportunity during the Q&A to ask the chat verbally. You'll also see, and this is not relevant right now while I'm sharing screen, but there's an option to be in either gallery or speaker view. Because we have a lot of people on the call today, and it is primarily Ross and I having a conversation, we'll ask you to put it on speaker view once I stop sharing screen. Okay. So I think that's actually all of the background that I needed to give you, which means let's put the screen on speaker view and Ross and I will start having our conversation. So, Ross, before we get into discussing Silent Power, the project, do you mind just introducing yourself?
Yeah, sure. So good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining. By way of a brief introduction, I've worked for Northern Powergrid for 12 years now. Sorry, screen froze there. I've worked for Northern Powergrid for 12 years now, and I worked in a range of different departments, including contract management, network inspections, and smart metering. And I've worked in the innovation team for 3 years, and I'm currently heading up the Silent Power and Integral project.
Great, thanks so much. Okay, on to Silent Power project then. What problem is Silent Power trying to solve?
Yeah, well, at Northern Powergrid, as is the same with all distribution network operators, we deploy a significant amount of diesel generators each and every year in order to restore customer supplies in the event of a network fault, and also to maintain supplies during a planned power interruption. And it's accepted really that the use of diesel generators in this manner is generally inefficient. And that's because the generator is sized for the peak load onto the network to which it's being connected. And as a result of that, for the vast majority of the time that it's working, it's connected, it's operating way below its optimum operating threshold. So, and that causes the running cost, the CO2 emissions, the noise levels are all relatively high when you compare that to a more efficient form of generation. So silent power is a way of us exploring really whether an electrical energy storage system will deliver benefits to our customers and to our operational staff.
Great. Thanks, Ross. So what is silent power?
Well, I think we have a really useful video that we could probably show at the moment, Alexa, which would probably put a little context, show the silent power van being used in a real life deployment, which I think would help viewers.
Silence is golden. From the minute it leaves the depot until it pulls up on a customer's drive.
Hello there. Hi, Mr. Johnson.
Yes,
It's Will from Northern Powergrid.
Oh, you couldn't put some electric on, have you?
That's the plan, yeah.
But the silence doesn't stop there.
It's one of our biggest issues is the complaints we get about, yes, you've restored my supply, but my neighbours are complaining about the noise. That's all going to go away now.
There's no noisy generator, there's no pollution, and there are no fuel leaks. It looks red, but it's green, very green, and fully self-contained.
Historically, they've been on trailers, which might be slightly more difficult to manoeuvre and get near to customers' properties.
We've miniaturised the unit to increase the power electronics and used a newer generation of batteries to develop the system that you now see. We always want to have a tangible benefit there at the end for customers through all of our innovation projects.
I think I worked for 35 years with Electricity Board. I had a long, enjoyable career with the old-fashioned generators. There was a lot of maintenance involved, and you had to have someone come along and keep topping you up with diesel fuel. No noise, and it's just sitting there like a car. And, brilliant.
The silent power van can maintain power for 2 households for 24 hours. But like all technologies, advance will be rapid.
The battery density improves all the time, and it's totally scalable, so you can put more batteries into a bigger vehicle and get more power. This time 10 years ago, you didn't have everything on your phone, so it can only move forward.
Silent power is good for customers, good for the environment, and good for the people who keep us connected.
I've worked in the industry 40 years, so seen a lot of innovation, and I've got to say this is one of the good ones.
Okay, that was a good video. Thanks, Ross. Can we talk a little bit more about what's inside the van? Like, if we were to open up the boot of the silent power van, what are we going to see? Oh, you're on mute. Sorry.
There we go. Well, there's 3 main components to the energy system, and that's the batteries, the inverter, and the telematics unit. And to give you an idea of scale, really, the batteries, and there's 5 of them in the system, are around about the size of a microwave, and the inverter and the telematics unit are about double the size of that again. But there's only one inverter and 1 telematics unit in the system.
Great. And how does it work?
Well, I think everyone is familiar with a battery, in that it's a device that stores chemical energy. and converts it to electrical energy. And the batteries that we use are manufactured by a company called Hyperdrive Innovation, who are based in Sunderland, and they use Nissan lithium-ion technology to build their battery sets, and it's the same battery cells which are used in the Nissan Leaf. And what we've also done as well, because as batteries supply a DC voltage, we have included an inverter in the system which is able to convert the supply to an AC voltage, which is what customers' homes require. And the telematics system which we include in there is to monitor performance remotely of the system in real time, so we can check things like the state of charge of the batteries, the temperature, where the unit is actually located at any time. So all of those parts were sent to a company called Off-Grid Energy, who are based in Rugby, and the final unit, when it was developed, is rated at 25 kilowatt hours and has a 40 kV output. And we expect with that we will be able to maintain supplies to a maximum of 3 domestic customers over a 24-hour period, assuming that a domestic customer uses somewhere in the region of 10 kilowatt hours over a 24-hour period. But it's going to be quite interesting over the course of the trial to find out if that assumption actually rings true.
Great, really interesting, Ross. What are the benefits to customers?
The main benefit, I would say, to a customer is the fact it's silent. At Northern Powergrid, we receive a number of customer complaints around the noise that generators produce, and it's not so much of a problem during the day when a generator is connected, but when you go to bed and you're trying to get off to sleep, that kind of low drone of the engine ticking over, for some reason you kind of focus in on it, and it's very difficult to get off to sleep. It can be quite disturbing. So the fact that we can put this on somebody's drive and give a completely silent supply is really quite an innovative step forward in terms of our offering for customers. That's the main benefit, I would say, to customers. Yeah.
Great. How long have you been working on Silent Power?
Been working on Silent Power now. Well, it was one of the first projects that was first pieces of work that was handed to me when I joined the innovation team. So for the best part of 3 years, I've been working on the project, and it was at a very, very early stage when I took it over.
And over the course of that time, then, what's the biggest challenge that you've encountered?
Yeah, well, the biggest challenge actually has been the maximum carrying capacity of the electric vehicle, which we have chosen to house the electrical energy storage unit. And that has forced us to lose some of the functionality that we had originally planned to include in the design phase of the project. So if you were to open the van now, you would see that there's physically more space for us to build a larger unit. But it was, as I say, it was the gross carrying weight that stopped us from building something bigger to put in the back of it. So if we were to do this project again, it would have been far easier to have put this in the back of a diesel transit van. But I think you always need to be mindful of the story when you're involved in an innovation project. And it doesn't really sit right with me that we would be investing all of this money in an electrical energy storage system and then just driving it out to site in a diesel transit. So that's why we chose to go down the route of the EV. So in order to overcome this issue, we've reduced the payload capacity from 30 kilowatt hours, as was originally planned in the early designs, to 25 kilowatt hours. And this in turn has brought down the number of domestic customers that we believe we can supply. And we'd also planned to include a small motor within the system to recharge the batteries. And the idea with that was, in the morning when the kids went off to school, parents went off to work, the system would sense a drop in load from the residential property it was connected to, and it would snap over to the small petrol motor that would start chugging away and charge up the batteries. And then when people returned at the end of the working day and the load started to increase, again, the system would sense that and snap back over to the batteries, giving that clean and silent supply. But unfortunately, we had to lose that because there was a lot of auxiliary equipment that was tied up in that, and we just didn't have the carrying capacity in the EV.
Right. And I think we have some questions popping up in relation to that, which it'll be interesting to dig into a bit later. Moving on from challenges then, what part of the project have you found to be the most surprising?
The most surprising? Well, Silent Power has been a great innovation project in that it has given us a tangible piece of kit that we could take along to conferences and to any events that Northern Powergrid are attending, and actually kind of strike up a dialogue with our customers and any stakeholders who are attending, and talk to them about the innovation projects that we're involved in. And I remember a conversation at the 2018 LCNI conference, which was based in Telford. And I got talking to an individual who worked with a chain of hotels. And the issue that they were describing was when a guest is driving to these hotels, which may be in a rural community, maybe quite isolated, if they drive there by electric vehicle, they're expecting to be able to charge their electric vehicle once they get there, which is a pretty reasonable demand. But this is not always possible in rural communities. Just the network may not be as robust in some areas and not configured to really deal with electric vehicle charging. So when I was giving them the tour of the Silent Power vehicle, they thought that this may be a way to overcome this issue. It's a mobile unit that they could drive to remote locations and use to charge up electric vehicles. And it was just really interesting having that dialogue with somebody who worked in a very different sector to see how they could use the vehicle, because it was something that we had never really planned in the design phase. It was something that came out of left field. So that's been quite surprising, the different applications that people have thought of.
Yeah, that is a pleasant surprise when you have something that you can go around and talk to people about. The sorts of conversations that arise must be very varied. Then in terms of successes, what part of the Silent Power project are you the most proud of?
So at the beginning of lockdown, Silent Power was deployed to restore supplies to a pharmacy. And I was really pleased that we could play our part in supporting that community at what were really challenging, uncertain times back then. And we had feedback afterwards from the field staff who had been sent out to connect the unit, and their reports were really positive, that the system was very simple to use, that it had been reliable. So that for me really was a personal high point in the project, that we were able to support our customers and get positive feedback on how the system actually performed.
Yeah, in very difficult and unpredictable times.
Yeah.
How can Silent Power be used to support Northern Powergrid friends and partners in their own journeys towards net zero?
Yeah. Well, the big advantage with Silent Power is that it doesn't need any diesel. So there's no associated fume or particulate contamination, and there's absolutely no risk of a fuel spill. So that it's good in sort of the net zero journey from that perspective. But the system is also bi-directional, and I think I've seen a few questions popping up on that point. So what that means is, if we connect it to a customer's property and they happen to have PV cells on their roof, we can use that energy to recharge the batteries inside. So it kind of highlights the point of some of the work that we are investigating to look at how microgrids can support the electrical network during times of peak demand. There's a few other projects that we have going which are involved in that, but Silent Power is probably the first opening project where we're starting to see benefits from that side of things. But throughout the project as well, we've worked with a whole range of stakeholders, including our diesel generator service providers. We've kept them informed about how the project's been progressing, how the technology's been performing, and it's really encouraging to see that now they are also starting to offer quite innovative technologies from their side, such as variable speed generators and hybrid systems. Silent Power, I think, is kind of pushed that journey on a little further, and it's good to start seeing commercial offerings coming from other people now.
Great. And you've kind of been hinting at this in some of your answers, but could you lay out for us where the project is headed next?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned earlier, the big limiting factor that we've had with this project and what we've had to overcome has been the carrying capacity issue of the electric vehicle. And that has caused us to lose some functionality. So as a phase 2, what I would like to do is develop a bigger system. If we could put it into a diesel transit, could certainly build a bigger unit that could supply more residential customers, potentially even a commercial customer. And we wouldn't have the range anxiety that we have when we take it out with an electric vehicle. We could cover much greater distances, maybe take it out into rural communities and be a little bit, and maybe take a different approach in how we connect it to customers' properties as well. So that's really where I see the Silent Power project developing. Hope we can do that.
Great. So we're getting a lot of questions through the chat, which is really exciting. I think we may be able to move to some of them now. I'll go up to the ones that were asked earlier along. We have some questions around earthing, actually. Ross, which you and I were talking about before everyone joined us on the call. We have, how are the earths managed between the battery and the home? And then a follow-up noting that there looked to be some sort of temporary earth rod in the garden in the video. So if you could speak to that, that'd be really great.
Yeah, I've had that question before, actually. I think you may see a clip in the video as well with the earthing spike. So when we started the project, we were thinking, could we do anything innovative around the earthing arrangement? And it turned out we couldn't. So we earth the unit the same way we would a traditional diesel generator as well, in that it's simply an earth spike that we put into the ground. We were trying to think of different ways to overcome that issue, but yeah, we kind of got tied up with a few other things, so we went with the tried and tested method of earth rods.
And then there's some questions relating to what happens if the outage lasts for more than one battery charge. And I think this question is particularly relevant now that you said that there was enough space in the unit to have the motor as you had originally wanted. And that you also suggested might change if people have solar on their roof, for example. And then the follow-up to that question, which Mike has asked, is what happens if the customer has a heat pump or an EV, as in what happens if they have a higher demand for electricity than the average home?
Than the average home, yeah, absolutely. So let's take the first part of that question then. So if a customer had PV panels on the roof, obviously that could extend the length of time that Silent Power could be connected. But let's say we take it out of site, they don't have any solar panels, and it lasts longer than a charge. Well, that's really where the telematics unit really comes into its own. So our operational staff who make the decision to deploy the Silent Power unit, they will keep a close eye on that at regular intervals throughout the fault. And in order to avoid another interruption to those customer supplies, what's likely to happen is we would call out a diesel generator to maintain supplies to that customer. We are targeting the use of Silent Power, though, on jobs where we think we can get the customer supplied, the the customer's supply is restored in less than 24 hours. But yes, if it goes on any longer than that, well, then we need to do something a little bit more substantial and put a diesel generator on there. And the other point is as well, if the customer has a larger heat pumps or an electric vehicle connection requirement, again, it may not be appropriate in every instance. So again, we may have to put a diesel generator out there on the network for that fault. It's certainly not a fix-all. It's not appropriate for all faults.
Right. This mentioning telematics connects to another question, which was, can you say what the telematics do?
Yeah, I do have a slide somewhere actually that gives an extract of the telematics system and the sort of thing that we can look at. So if anyone's familiar with a share price, if anyone tracks the price of shares, they may be familiar with that sort of a graph whereby you can have a look at a 24-hour period, 5-day, monthly, year, 5 years. So we can log into the telematics system and see how the battery system, how the state of charge is rising or falling at any given time. We can check the temperature of the batteries, if it's connected to, if it's being charged at the time. We can see the rate of charge as well, and that system is really useful for our dispatch engineers and operational engineers who are making the decision to send the unit out to keep an eye on it and make sure that the customer isn't at risk of the battery going flat and them experiencing another interruption to their supply.
Great. On this topic, our most recent question, and I'll be bouncing around, so don't worry if I didn't ask that, was, could a supply be taken from a nearby street lamp to recharge the battery?
We haven't looked at that. There's nothing to say that we couldn't, but we don't really want to go around, I suppose, interfering with street furniture and taking supplies off there. Technically, yes. There's no reason why we wouldn't do that. It's just something that we haven't used. We have something quite specific in mind. I've worked with the operational engineers across Northern Powergrid, and they're quite settled and quite comfortable with the way and how we're going to use silent power. So we didn't see that there was a reason to investigate that further. But yes, it is technically possible.
We have David asking, do you recover any costs from the supplier for the electricity used?
No, not for the use of silent power. No.
Okay. And then there were some questions about the two-way bidirectional, which we've already answered in your discussion earlier. Then we have a question from Navpreet that actually is connecting to one of the other Innovation Festival conversation sessions. Is the uses of devices like silent power factored in anywhere in the distributed future energy scenarios that your colleagues also, as part of the innovation team, are working on? How much crossover is there between your work? Is there any, is the use of devices like silent power factored in anywhere in the future energy scenarios, like the distributed future energy scenarios? So how much crossover, I guess, is the work that you're doing within silent power to some of the other innovations?
How much of the other innovations? Well, silent power, yeah. Silent power isn't factored, but larger scale innovation projects that we're looking at, probably the ones that spring to mind, things like auto design, foresight. They are factored in more heavily. Silent power really was a proof of concept of technology, and that we could bring all these things, batteries, an inverter, a telematics unit, that we could successfully bring those things together in a mobile unit and deploy that successfully. So it's not a particularly large scale trial that would necessarily move the dial on something like that. So I would be putting those projects is something that can have more bang for their buck across the entire network.
Great, thank you. You may have answered some of these questions about scaling up when you were talking about where the project is going next. I think we're getting a bit of a delay, Ross. Are you? You can still hear me?
Yeah, I'm I can still hear you, but there's a little delay here, Alexa.
Okay, that's fine. We have a question from Andrew. Are you able to scale this up to support customers at an LV feeder level when there are faults in main cables? And then for people who don't know, it would be good to have a LV acronym buster. Can you hear Ross?
You sound a little, but I can't hear you.
Okay. If you could just start answering some of the other questions in the chat, then you don't need to hear me to do that.
Okay, I'll have a look at the. Okay. Can you hear me all right? Any provisions which are not. Okay, so I'm up to what about rather than vehicle did you consider? Yes, absolutely we did. SSE did a similar project where they trailerized a version of Power, and what we wanted to do was build a more mobile unit so it could give us much greater flexibility in the different types of deployments and different types of faults that we could send it out to. But if we were to do a silent power phase 2, I would be interested in potentially developing a unit that could go onto a trailer and could also go into a diesel transit vehicle. So we could have quite a bit of flexibility in terms of how we deployed that one. So it is something that we have considered and may be doing in the future. Question there from Tony at Andrew Urquhart. Assuming that the customers are aware that they supplied by a battery and getting free electricity, do you find that people will self-regulate the demand to make the charge last longer? Well, we certainly haven't asked customers to self-regulate because the way we view it, in order to say that you're back on supply, well, you should be able to go about your day, not have to think about your electrical supply. But yes, if a customer was to self-regulate and not kind of turn everything on at once, then they would be able to draw out the charge from those batteries for a significantly longer period. So it would certainly help the use of the silent power batteries. What are the prerequisites for scaling this innovation project? This is a question from Navpreet. wanting to build some machine learning models into the telematics data, that would be really interesting, Navpreet. Because we're in the trial phase at the moment, I can't really give you too much of an insight because we're still collecting that base body of data. But depending on what comes out of it, it would be really interesting to build some learning around that. And it's something that we will be keeping an eye on and doing a deep dive into when we come to do the closeout report for this project. This is a question from Tony Brown. Is there anything you can advise on the number of diesels that have been deployed at any one peak time to keep customers supplied? And what is the aspiration of silent power roll out to replace these? Well, is managed by our regional zones, and I just simply don't work in those departments. The hand that I could quote to you. But as I said before, silent power isn't a fix. There'll still absolutely be a place for diesel generation on the fleet, but I think over time, as the energy density of the batteries gets better, we'll certainly learn a whole load of lessons about how we can deploy the silent power vehicle, and we have plans to build a bigger unit. I would hope that over time, especially with the work that the generator service providers are doing with the introduction of their hybrid systems as well, that battery systems will slowly begin to overtake the use of diesel generators.
We have a couple questions that were a bit higher up on cost, and then one as well on risk. So I was wondering if you could talk about answering Amy's question about the cost per unit through silent power, and then maybe the more recent question from David about the risk of the battery setting fire.
Yeah, that's a good question there, David. We've actually throughout the relations with a risk of the batteries catching fire, and it was quite enlightening for me actually to learn about the challenges which are faced by the fire departments and the rise in electric vehicles and what they do and know how to respond when a car bursts into flames. But it's something quite different when we get that thermal runaway with electric vehicles. So we did have those conversations. There is a risk, I suppose, that these can catch fire. All I would say is the new Tesla vehicles which are coming out have far greater energy density than the silent power vehicle, and they're still commercially available. So we've worked with the fire department. We've put all the protection mechanisms in place. They were sat with that, but I do accept that there is a challenge for the fire department in terms of how they respond to those fires. But we monitor the temperature of the batteries remotely. As I say, there's protection settings set in there, so that if there was any signs that the batteries were beginning to heat up, there's a kill switch in there so that the batteries would cease to operate. We would obviously like to avoid that at all costs.
Great. And what is the cost per unit generation? Do you have a figure for that?
I don't have a cost for that at the moment. It's something that we'll be looking to answer, I think, when we get the data from the telematics system at the end of the project. So we need to investigate how the batteries perform over their life, over the deployments, because depending on the sort of deployments that they respond to, that will have an effect on the battery's life. So we'll analyze all of that at the end of the project when we do the closeout report.
Great, thanks. We actually have a note from Navpreet about that, just saying that the battery operation data can be used to mitigate the risk associated with fire. So,
yeah,
good to be thinking about that moving forward. I think there's a couple of questions still on the connection with EVs.
Okay.
Did you address, will it be interesting to see if progress on the commercial EV payload, and Andrew's thinking the VWE crafter will unlock the next stage of this development?
Yes, absolutely agree. EVs are just coming on leaps and bounds in terms of the weight that they can carry in the range that they can travel. When we started this project, I think we bought the vehicles, so we use a Nissan ENV200s to house the electrical energy storage unit. And I think we bought the vehicles at the beginning of 2018. I've also heard a story from Nissan that we actually got the last ENV200s, the last 3 ENV200s in the country, because they were bringing an end to that model, and they've released a new model now. And I think when you're doing an innovation project, there's always that risk that you kind of hold off doing it, saying, well, there's a new generation of batteries, there's a new inverter, or whatever it is, just around the corner if you just hold off a few more months. But I think realistically, you just have to dive in at certain points so you can get the project up and underway. But yes, EVs are moving on leaps and bounds, as I say. So to do the project now, there's a much better ENV200 commercially available now, but we just didn't have access to that at the time when we were building the units.
Great, thank you. I think several questions have asked this, and you hinted at it during your answers as well. But could you speak a little bit more about use on commercial or industrial sites, and how Silent Power is preparing for that or not, or sort of where you see that going?
Yeah. Well, it kind of depends what you class as commercial or industrial. As I say, when we were designing Silent Power, we thought we would build up some base data using individual residential properties and get comfortable with the way we were using it. So I was really quite impressed with our guys when they took the decision to take it out to that pharmacy on one of its first jobs. They built up over that short period of time, they built up their level of comfort with how the system was using, so they decided to take it to that job, which of course at the time was very high profile and performed without a hitch. So it depends on what sort of level we're talking about, commercial and industrial customers. I don't think the Silent Power vehicle at the moment with its 25 kilowatt hours could probably do anything meaningful for what I think about when I imagine commercial customers. It may be a little bit different if they have exactly the right sort of maybe PV installation in their usage, maybe peak at only certain times. So it may be some instances where we could work it. But I think when we look at our phase 2, where we can significantly expand the size of the unit and the energy density of it, I think that's when we're in the realms of looking at commercial customers. It may be that over the course of the trial, as I say, that we may get ourselves in a place where we can do that, but I envisage the Silent Power vehicle that we have now to be more kind of geared towards residential customers.
Great. Our most recent question from Alistair: how did Northern Powergrid fund this innovation project? Was it through an NIA or an IC? Is there any interest from other DNOs as of yet?
Yeah, good question, Alistair. It was an NIA funded project. We've at the LCNI conferences, which we attend, I don't know who Alistair works for, or he may well have been along to some of those conferences, but we've talked to a number of DNOs about that, and I'm hoping at the time when we come to do our closeout report, we may very well do a closeout event as well, a closeout presentation. We'll certainly invite representatives along from the other DNOs, and we can we can share the learning with them. So it may very well be that silent power is just the beginning, and the DNOs themselves start to invest in this technology. I'm not sure at that. I'm not sure at this stage.
Great, thank you. Is there anyone who didn't want to, oh, just another question from Sandy. Are there limits with battery capacity as there are with using batteries to power vehicles, or could batteries potentially go longer? Or could batteries be no longer suitable for fleet vehicles used for this?
Let me just have a little read of that question. Are there limits with battery capacity as there are with using batteries to power vehicles? Could batteries no longer suitable for few? Right. Okay. So repurposed batteries which have come to the end of their working life. We chose to do this project, as I say, using the Gen 4 batteries, which are produced by Hyperdrive Innovation, because we wanted, as with this innovation project, we want to build up not just use of the system, but we also want to build up a really healthy data set where we can look at, based on the deployments that the vehicle has had, how has this affected the battery life? That's a really interesting question that we want to answer. So we thought the best way to go about that was to use fresh batteries, if you like, rather than repurposed batteries from electric vehicles. But when we get to the end of the project and we look at the effect that these deployments have had on the battery life, it may very well be that we come to the conclusion, well, we could use repurposed batteries for the purpose of the silent power system.
Great, thank you. Is there anyone who, for some reason, didn't want to type out their question but would be keen to ask it verbally? Now would be the time to do so. So feel free to unmute yourself. Okay. If not, I have a question for you, Ross. What's the question you wish someone had asked?
Well, I think everyone's done a very good job asking questions. The thing that I wish maybe somebody had have asked was how have Northern Powergrid themselves adapted to use of silent power in their day-to-day operations. And it's just to give it an outline, really, that the field operations department, who are the guys who are responsible for taking this unit out and connecting it to customers' properties, if we didn't have them on board, there's a risk that the units would simply be sitting in the depots and not be used. So what we've done is I involved representatives from our field operations department at very early stages when we were talking about the project, at real conceptual design stages, just asking them about how they thought something like this could be used, little nice to haves along the way that would make their life a little easier. So it's really useful to start getting their feedback now and how they think that the unit's been performing. It's all been very encouraging to date, and it's quite interesting to see, because we've based one of the vehicles in Shiremoor, which is beside Newcastle, one vehicle in Northallerton, and one vehicle in Cleckheaton, which is beside Leeds, to kind of notice the subtle differences in the way that our operational teams use them differently. But it's been very positive reactions, and if any of them are tuned in at the moment, just want to really give my thanks for them being so positive in the use of the vehicle.
Great. And if people want to find out more information or stay tuned for the next stages of development, can you tell them where to look?
Yeah. So if anyone, the video that you showed earlier in the panel set there, Alexa, I believe that is available on our YouTube channel. I think there may even be an extended version of the video as well. I would direct people to the Smarter Networks portal, which you can find just by typing it into Google, which lists not just Northern Powergrid's innovation projects, but innovation projects, the gas and electrical sectors. and also our innovation section on our website as well. We'll be sure to keep that updated as and when we have any developments with the project. And if we do hold a Silent Power close down event, it would be great to have you guys come along to that, so keep your eyes peeled for that one.
Great. And if people want to follow up with you and explore this more in the future, are you happy to do so?
Yes, absolutely. ross.mcfarlane@northernpowergrid.com. Please drop me an email if you have any questions, or if you want to have a conversation offline, not a problem. And thank you everyone for taking time out of your Friday mornings to dial in today. I hope you found it insightful and maybe even useful.
Great, thanks so much. And I'm just going to pull Victoria into the conversation quickly to let everyone know where they'll be able to find the recordings and other information.
Yeah, absolutely. I will email everybody once we've kind of finished. I will upload this session itself to the engagement page on our website, and everything that Ross has just mentioned, I'll put a link into the email as well, so it's all there for you. Nice and easy.
Great. So I'm going to share my screen one more time, because this is not the last of the Innovation Festival. So please take a look what we have coming up. We have another session later today on auto design at lunchtime if you're interested. And then next week we have 2 sessions on vehicle to grid within a visual line of sight and foresight. And then the final week we wrap up with micro resilience and polywood. So Vic has more information about all of that. Hopefully you received emails, but we'd love for you to tune in, continue to share with friends and colleagues, and continue to come and ask excellent questions. So it's been a real pleasure having you on today. If you could answer the poll that Patrick's about to launch on the screen right now, that would be great. Just to let us know how you found today. And you can also type that into the chat, message me privately if you have some specific feedback. That would be great. And otherwise, I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope you learned some stuff about Silent Power and can start thinking about the applications for yourself. See you hopefully at the next stage of Innovation Festival events.